NVIDIA runs AI. FCC is neutral again. Amazon goes Hoosier. Cisco users get hacked. Canonical goes Numbats. Is VMware omniscient? And we take a closer look at the AI startup landscape in this week's episode of the Gestalt IT Rundown. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the May 1st edition of the Rundown, also known as Justin Timberlake's least favorite day. If you don't know why, go to TikTok and you'll figure it out pretty quick. However, if you're a fan of bikes, it is National Learn to Ride a Bike Day. I am someone who's fallen off of many bikes in my lifetime, Tom Hollingsworth, your host of the Rundown this week. And joining me is my wonderful co-host, Mr. Stephen Foskett. Stephen, welcome to the show.
It is good to be here. I would like to also point out that it is National Skilled Trades Day, and we would all be dead if not for those people and their incredible skills and their incredible society contributions. So thank you, electricians, plumbers, carpenters, everyone who makes all this work.
Well, the skills that we have here at the Rundown are talking about this week's news. So we're going to dive right in because our first story has been something that's been rumored ever since NVIDIA GTC because they've acquired Run AI Labs. The deal has been valued at around $700 million, according to reports, which was down from the projected maximum of around $1 billion. Run AI has created a virtualization layer for deep learning workloads that allows for accelerated training for AI models while also reducing the amount of resources used. Part of the way that this is accomplished is through parallel computing algorithms that break those models down into smaller units for faster completion. Now, Stephen, there was a recent chance to see what Run AI is working on as part of a vast showcase that we released a couple of months ago, and you got an up close look at this. So I was wondering if you could give us a little background on this deal and tell us why this is such a big deal for NVIDIA.
Well, I am very, very happy to see this happen. Overall, I think that it's good for the market. Essentially, Run AI, as you mentioned, they presented as part of this vast data showcase that we recorded at AI Field Day, as did NVIDIA. And it was very, very clear at that event, and of course, it was very clear before and after that as well to anybody who's following the industry, that Run AI's tools are particularly valuable. Essentially, companies are playing around with AI quite a lot. But when it comes to actually running it and operationalizing AI based applications, well, there's the challenge, right? You have to think about workload management. You have to think about scaling. You have to think about running containerized AI apps in Kubernetes. You have to think about memory and storage management. You have to think about optimization of resources, all that boring stuff that IT operations has done for literally every other part of compute all this time. Well, it makes sense to do that stuff for AI as well. Run AI basically does that. They have a software solution that is a control plane, it's a cluster engine. It's, I guess, sort of, probably overstating it, but it's kind of like what VMware did for running virtual machines. Run AI does for AI-based applications. They operationalize the whole darn thing. They put metrics and controls behind it. They allow things to be deployed and moved around. Basically, they do the hard stuff that operations has to do. We were impressed by their solution. They've been very, very close to NVIDIA, just like VMware unlocked so much potential from server vendors, from CPU vendors, et cetera. Run AI unlocks potential for the companies that are making all this hardware that's being sold and deployed, not just in the enterprise or in the cloud, but in the enterprise now. And that's why it makes sense for NVIDIA to invest here, because NVIDIA so far, well, they've been selling a lot of hardware into hyperscalers and cloud environments that pretty much have this stuff covered. But they're also increasingly selling directly into enterprise. If they want those enterprise customers to be able to actually use that hardware they're buying, they need something like this. So there it is. It makes a lot of sense. If you're interested in it as well, we're going to link to an analyst note by my colleague Paul Nashwati that talks a little bit more about what Run AI does. Also, I would recommend checking out that Tech Field Day video, which you can find in your favorite friendly neighborhood search engine. Just look for Field Day and Run AI. Last week, the FCC restored Title II classification of broadband providers. This is known as net neutrality, and it's something that Tom and I have been talking about on the rundown for a very long time. This move means that the FCC is once again the power to enforce service levels and protect against national threats. But it also changes the way that consumers and service providers interact in this whole broadband space. Neutrality was a very popular move in 2015 when it was first introduced, but it was repealed by our friend and yours, Ajit Pai, in 2017. The decision was largely seen as positive to restore it, with critics merely claiming that the FCC should have had an explicit mandate from Congress instead of making the move on their own. Frankly, I think pretty much everyone except the broadband providers is cheering this, right, Tom?
Yeah, you're right, Stephen. Hold on a second. Let me let me take a quick drink out of a reasonable sized coffee cup with no branding on it. Okay, now that we've gotten that out of the way, it took you long enough. All you've got to do is go online and Google John Oliver net neutrality. The piece he did on this is 7 years old. End of story. You should definitely go watch that video because it is one of my favorite ways that a comedian makes news make sense, and also the scathing analysis of our friend Ajit Pai is spot on. Because the original reason why net neutrality was repealed was basically a political consideration. Because someone decided that businesses should not be fettered by things like regulations when it comes to protecting the customers. Because, as pointed out in John Oliver in that particular criticism some 7 years ago, rather than enforcing things like making sure that your provider doesn't institute a data cap for no good reason, they should just put a disclaimer on there saying that they won't do that. Which, no company has ever gone back on any disclaimer that they've ever added, right? You're right, they all have. One of the things that caused a huge problem and made the administration want to take a look at this was the fact that we all spent about 2.5 years kind of stuck in our houses, and we had to live with what these internet service providers were giving us and how they were treating us. I think you may remember that shortly after the pandemic started and everyone was schooling from home through Zoom and WebEx and other platforms, suddenly all of the internet service providers were more than happy to lift any data caps that they might have had. And then as soon as it was reasonable, they put them right back in place because, oh, yeah, you guys shouldn't be using that much stuff. What's happening now is that the FCC is stepping back in to be the arbiter between corporations that want to gouge people for every cent that they have and people who have sense. And I think that's a good thing. And here's the reason why: because corporations should be regulated, especially when it's a service that is necessary for the operation of our world today. I challenge you to go find somebody out there who works in a job that is not a salaried position and ask them how they get their schedule. I guarantee you it's either done in an app or it's done in some form of online situation where the company just assumes that everybody has a cell phone now, because everybody does. Broadband is no longer a nice thing to have like it was when Stephen and I were growing up. It is an absolute necessity, like healthcare. You know what? People need to have unfettered access to the internet without fear of restriction, without fear of, metering or anything like that. What this essentially does is says to the world, you can no longer get away with trying to nickel and dime your customers for every little thing that they have. Or better yet, it restores those common carrier rules that say you're not allowed to police content because we have a law that says you're not allowed to police content. You can't police content if you are a neutral provider. So this should get rid of all that Section 230 stuff. Who am I kidding? It won't. But this is a win for people who use the internet, for people who believe that internet service providers have way too much power, and for people who do not like to drink out of a 64-ounce coffee mug. So enough said on that. Amazon will be forking out $11 billion to build some new data centers in the Hoosier state. The move bolsters the bookstore's presence in Indiana, where it employs nearly 26,000 people already. There are also some substantial tax breaks on the table for the project, which is expected to have a 50-year term overall. The total number of tax credits could be up to $80 million. Amazon released a statement where they said that they have long been a partner in the economic development of the state of Indiana and they welcome the opportunity to add AWS data centers to the lineup. Stephen, that little tiny bookstore and somewhat humongous cloud provider seems to be interested in the state of Indiana. What do you think about that?
Well, I think it's interesting. There's some interesting aspects here. Speaking to you from Ohio, it is interesting to see that they're deploying this in St. Joe instead of closer to Indianapolis. But the South Bend area is close to Michigan. It's close to a nuclear power plant run by American Electric Power. And it looks to me like it's on the fiber cable lines between the East Coast and Chicago, which makes a lot of sense for Amazon. Also, of course, by locating it in Indiana and having this be literally the biggest capital investment ever for Indiana, I think, um, and a big job creator, supposedly. This is probably a move by Amazon to expand their footprint. They already have a pretty good footprint in Ohio and Illinois and Michigan, as well as to get some of that sweet economic incentives like tax exemptions and so on. I imagine it says in the article that Amazon's going to get about $78 million of incentives to support this. That's a lot of money, but it's kind of a drop in the bucket when they're talking about investing $11 billion there. But even so, I imagine that things like that are one reason that companies are looking to deploy new data centers outside of the traditional hotspots. Still, it does make sense. As I said, Indiana has a pretty good untapped market. The area, St. Joe County, has some good educational resources, which will likely give them some good workers. Frankly, Midwestern people are awesome, so you can count on hiring them. Also, it's kind of an untapped area in terms of competition for these folks, so that helps as well. So it makes a lot of sense overall. It's nice to see these companies expanding outside of their traditional footprints. And I don't actually know what the mascots are, so I'm just going to say go Indiana sports ball team. Cisco released a statement that some of their adaptive security appliances have been compromised by hackers. The group known as UAT 4356, which I think was that George Lucas's first movie? No, that was something else. Anyway, this group is reportedly state sponsored. The post went on to further claim that the attackers were looking to specifically target government networks and were looking to compromise other systems, such as those from Microsoft. Microsoft did not comment on the story, and the CISA was not able to verify any report from Cisco at the time of the writing. The affected devices have been patched, and Cisco is urging users to apply those patches as soon as possible.
Here's the thing. Perimeter firewalls are always going to be attacked. That's literally why we started calling them bastion hosts several years ago, is because they literally are the castle walls that are preventing people from getting into your network. But this is problematic for one other reason. Notice that they're not compromising the firewalls because they're trying to, take them over and intercept SSL sessions and get your bank account numbers and things like that. They're going after government agencies, they're state sponsored, and they're attacking Microsoft products. Why would that be? Rewind the clock back to earlier this year when we announced that Microsoft had released a statement saying that their systems had been penetrated by government sponsored actors. And there was a lot of code that had been stolen. There were a lot of things that had been taken. I mean, it wasn't more than a couple of months ago that we released a story here on the rundown where we talked about people had gotten in and read emails from Microsoft executives. This is a multi-stage attack. When I see someone like, when I see WannaCry or when I see any of the other hacking groups that are out there doing this for a profit, yeah, it's terrible when, Maersk gets all of their ships infected with a virus while they're in transit between, two ports. But that is acceptable damage, I guess would be a good way to put it. This is an insidious thing that is slow and under the surface because it's a multi-stage compromise. I have valuable resources to get at kind of the soft underbelly of your organization because I have keys to Microsoft stuff. All I've got to do is get through the front door. That means that if I can get in through a vulnerable device using a novel exploit, then I have a significant impact on the way your business can be run. Or in the case of a government, I can get a hold of stuff I'm probably not supposed to have. And that's another way that, organizations do intelligence work now. The days of a suave British spy in a bow tie drinking gin or vodka martinis is done. All of the intelligence gathering that we see now is mostly done through these kinds of groups. And because you're state sponsoring a basically contractor group, if something goes wrong, you can disavow their knowledge and you're not going to get caught. This kind of goes hand in hand with another story that we didn't have time to cover, where the UK has actually outlawed putting default passwords on devices because they're being used for botnets and things like that, which I think is a valuable tool. But some of the protections that they put in there are things that we should be doing anyway, like randomized passwords, using a password manager or something like that, or creating accounts so that the password must be input upon first initialization or login. That will go a long way to preventing things like this from happening. But we've got to start taking a closer look at the way that security is done, because to be honest with you, the days of the Bastion host or Edge firewall are quickly coming to a close, and we're going to have to start adopting zero trust methodology, because if we don't, we're going to find ourselves in a much bigger problem going forward. Right on schedule, Canonical has released Ubuntu version 24.04, which is codenamed Noble Numbat. This is the latest long-term support version of the leading Linux operating system, which means we'll see support for it through 2036, assuming Canonical, Ubuntu, and the human race lives that long. Ubuntu releases tend to be incremental, but for those that stick to the LTS images, it's been a fairly old kernel for a while, and the associated tools haven't been updated since 2022. There are lots of advancements for desktop users, but what can those of us who run servers and Ubuntu in the cloud expect from this software defined diurnal insectivorous marsupial?
Well done, Tom. Well done. Um, so I am so excited by this that I wanted to make this our top story of the week. And frankly, that's because I am a big Ubuntu user. I love it. I use it all the time. And like most people, I think in our audience, I only run the LTS versions because, frankly, if I can't count on my server having solid support, I for as long as it's theoretically going to be useful, I ain't going to use it in production. LTS versions of Ubuntu have been really, really excellent. Ubuntu does provide 5 years of support. If you're an Ubuntu Pro user, they're extending that to friggin' 12 years. The standard support is going to go to 2029. The extended support is going to go, well, I can't count that far, and I'm not sure my computers are going to keep running in 2036. But the point is, this thing is going to be the next solid release of Ubuntu. As you mentioned, it's predictable. It's right there in the name. This is version 2404. You know what the next LTS version is going to be called? It's going to be called 2604. I guarantee it, but I don't know which animal it's going to be named after. Anyway, what's included here? Well, a lot of stuff. A lot of people in the server space are thrilled, literally like partying in the street. Well, maybe not literally partying in the streets because these people are boring, but excited because Intel Quick Assist is in there. If you've got especially fourth gen Intel Xeon CPUs, you can use Quick Assist to basically make everything run smoother and faster, especially security, compression, that kind of workload. We have the Linux 6.8 kernel, which brings a lot of new capabilities over the older kernels that we've been running all this time. A lot of new hardware support, automatic firmware updates, very cool stuff like that. It also includes NetPlan. If you wanted more YAML in your network configuration, well, now you've got it because you've got NetPlan. I don't know whether that's something that I'm going to party in the street about, but well, we'll see. as well as enhancements to literally every other tool that we use in production. Things like Ruby and Python and Perl, all of these libraries have been updated. Some of us have been a little frustrated that the version, for example, of PHP or of Python maybe is a little on the white beard side in the 2204 version of Ubuntu. Well, now we're going to get the good new one. Basically, everything is there. So, should you upgrade all of your servers to 2404? No. Why not? Because it hasn't been released yet. Well, it has, but only .0. .1 comes out in August. That's going to be the regular, real production server release of it. So until then, if you type do release upgrade, you're not going to get a new version. You're still using 2204 because, again, remember, this is LTS. We're conservative. We do this right. We make sure that it's rock solid. We make sure that it's really going to run, that there's no security issues. And that's why people like me run Ubuntu. So I can't wait for August to roll around because I'm going to be upgrading my servers and I'm going to be enjoying all of this Linux 6.8 goodness. Would an end user computing division by any other name smell just as sweet? Well, VMware by Broadcom is hoping that's true, as they've announced that the former EUC business will now be known as Omnissa, which I think was the name of a character from Deep Space Nine. Anyway, this rebranding is part of the spin off of the business to KKR. The move is widely seen as a sign that Broadcom is focused on the data center market and is moving out of anything not directly involved with the consumption of cloud and hybrid cloud licenses. This new name was apparently chosen in a process that involved employees, customers, and partners, and probably has no bearing on the trademark implementations of this fancy new name. Also of note is that the new brand is in no way affiliated with omnidirectional space situational awareness, or Omnissa, which is used to enhance the resolution of space imaging, where you might actually see Deep Space Nine and you might see Omnissa waving back at you from that space station.
Shout out to Marcus J. Holzinger from the University of Georgia Tech, who came up with Omni SSA. And fun fact, it actually has hardware, which is not something that EUC actually has, because EUC is, of course, the amalgamation of all of VMware's virtual desktop stuff. So I think this would be, of course, the appropriate time to mention that year 2024 is, of course, the year of the virtual desktop. No, I'm just kidding. It's not, because that's never going to happen. But this is the thing. VMware, well, technically Broadcom, knows that they need to get rid of this asset because there's value in it and because someone's going to buy it, in this case, KKR. But you can't call it VMware EUC if you're not part of VMware anymore. I also want you to click on the link in the announcement blog post that goes to the VMware site, where they talk about the word cloud that they came up with, that kind of tells you all of the things you need to know about it. I think some of my personal favorites in this whole thing are, reliability and trustworthy. And nowhere in it does it say anything about high performance or, valuable, or any of the other things that I would expect to see from a solution that is focused on virtualizing my desktop. Don't get me wrong, KKR wouldn't pay for it if there wasn't a market for this stuff, if there wasn't value to be had in it. I honestly think that what you're going to see pretty soon is that KKR is going to take this Omnissa brand and they're going to push it out everywhere to be able to try to continue to capitalize on that cloud infrastructure. So you're still going to be paying for running Omnissa. You're probably going to be running it on AWS. You're going to be running it on Azure. And they're going to try to tell you that it's going to be just as good as running it on-prem. But I don't necessarily know that this is going to increase the addressable market for this, because think of the number of people that use technology today that don't necessarily have a virtual desktop. I mean, apps don't care about your desktop anymore. And most of those either run on a mobile device or they run in some kind of a web browser. So, I mean, I want to say that this is a good move overall, but I don't necessarily know that this is going to be a money making move for KKR in the long run. And as we've seen in the past, a lot of times these capital investment funds love to carve out little pieces and sell them off to make their money back. So this could be the beginning of the end for the Deep Space Nine character formerly known as VMware EUC, which I believe was one of the Borg. We had a story we wanted to take a closer look at, and it's got some big bucks attached to it because you don't need an algorithm to know that AI is the hottest investment right now outside of frozen concentrated orange juice. Investors are seeing a mountain of money that Nvidia is making, and they're going to be giving startups all the funding they could possibly hope for. Now, while this massive funding for Silicon Valley startups is old news, at least here on the rundown, the recent wave has seen these huge investments coming very early in the startup stage instead of in later rounds, when they've built a product and they're ready to release it onto the market. 2023 saw almost $22 billion in AI startup funding. The average deal per startup is $55 million per company. In case you were wondering, the Silicon Valley average for a startup funding round in that early stage is around $8 million. However, the investors are starting to ask questions about revenue, and startups are having a hard time answering them. Are we seeing the promise of AI meet the reality of the business world, Stephen?
Well, I'm saying not quite yet. After all, we did just see Andreessen Horowitz start a new AI fund. We were actually going to cover that on the rundown, but then we said no. This is the rundown. We don't cover stuff like that. But it is out there. Essentially, there's a brand new fund. It's going to be funding the next wave of Silicon Valley AI startups. Um, and so I think it's too early to say that funding of AI startups is dead. That being said, I think that a lot of people are getting a lot more savvy about not just throwing money blindly at AI. We're seeing some really big valuations for companies with really small revenue numbers right now. And that's based on the promise of what the company could do in the future. And could that company meet those expectations? Oh, heck yeah. I mean, some of these valuations sound really big. I mean, $1 billion, $5 billion, $10 billion. I mean, that's big numbers there, big money. Um, but that being said, that's not huge money for a Silicon Valley startup. So, could they meet investor expectations and have a successful acquisition or IPO or something? Yeah, sure, I could see it happening. On the other hand, I think that people are maybe starting to say maybe we don't need to be investing quite this much. Particularly, one of the things that occurs to me, a lot of the money that's gone into AI startups has been turned right around and gone straight back out the door to NVIDIA to buy more and more and more hardware. And a lot of the billions of dollars that we see invested in this area are literally just signed over as checks to NVIDIA. You'll see numbers coming out this week as well. Amazon and Microsoft and Meta and so on are announcing all sorts of acquisitions of additional hardware investments in the tens of billions, high tens of billions in some cases. Tesla just announced as part of their earnings about how much money they've spent on NVIDIA GPUs. There's a lot of companies spending a lot of money on a lot of hardware. And frankly, I'm wondering when that gravy train is going to end, especially with regard to training, because we have companies like CoreWeave, Microsoft with Azure, certainly is right there, Google, Amazon, that can basically let you rent the hardware to do your training instead of having to buy it and deploy it yourselves. And then you can start looking at deploying applications on less hardware in terms of inferencing. Now, there's still going to be some training needs. There's going to be transfer learning. There's going to be fine-tuned training. But I think increasingly we're going to see the end of the I'm going to make my own billion parameter large language model thing. And instead, we're going to see the I'm going to take this off the shelf one. I'm going to retrain it. I'm going to use RAG. I'm going to use transfer learning. I'm going to figure out some way of basically making this existing model work for me and my application. And that doesn't require as much hardware. I think that's really what we're going to see from a lot of the startups that are coming out, especially the next wave startups. It doesn't make sense for them to retrain another giant LLM. Now, that being said, I could see them building a completely different type of machine learning model and needing a lot of hardware to train that. But not everybody's going to be in that game. Instead, what I think there's going to be is a lot more companies that are going to be using off the shelf models, using cloud-based compute and doing some very cool stuff with AI that doesn't maybe require this kind of investment. What do you think, Tom?
No, Steven, you're so optimistic.
I'm
I
so
love that
nuanced.
about you. I would be willing to follow that line of logic and be very optimistic if I didn't see everybody spending billions of dollars to buy Nvidia clusters to build slightly different chatbots from each other. When I'm a startup in Silicon Valley and I'm making a thing, whether it's a server or a software package or whatever, if something were to happen and they had to liquidate my company, they can sell that for money, right? Like I can go buy, take all the hardware and sell it out the back door or sell it at an auction and recoup some of my investment. If I spend billions of dollars to create an algorithm that everybody else is creating, what's that worth to anyone? Hardly anything. And I think that that's where the problem is coming here is when you look at a hardware based startup or someone who's doing software, you have an iterative process, right? Like I can see checkpoints along the way where like, okay, you've got this going. The UX looks pretty good. You're going to add these features or, it runs and it runs with between two of them. And I, as an investor, I can see that you're making progress. I can't see that if the algorithm's opaque, right? Oh, great. You asked it, what's the difference between a cow and a goat? And today it didn't freak out and want to find Sarah Connor. That to me says that the investment money that they're pouring into this black hole, whether or not it's just going to hardware or not, is not producing tangible returns. And like if you read the Wall Street Journal article that we've linked here, they're basically taking a huge bath on everybody out there because they all have kind of the same story. We spend all of this money trying to develop something and then we don't know what to do with it. I mean, look at the recent story where a bunch of AI startup folks just wholesale went to Microsoft after the whole open AI issue. Like they had, they were considered to be some of the smartest kids on the block, and they created a chat bot that helped you talk about your feelings. I'm not saying mental health is not important. It absolutely is. But do we need to spend $4 billion to create a chatbot that will replicate what I used to have with Dr. Sabetso back when I ran a Sound Blaster 16 ISA card in DOS? I mean, it's slightly better and more understanding. But my problem with this whole thing is, like you said, all of this money is just being reshuffled around. If I'm sending all of this money to you and you're sending it directly to NVIDIA, why am I not sending it directly to NVIDIA? It's because everybody wants to pull the slot machine handle on the chance that one of these companies becomes the next NVIDIA. It's not going to happen. But they're hoping to get enough of their investment back that they can do something about it. I think that even compared to some other Silicon Valley startups that we've seen in the past, this is an even bigger chance because if they fail, and let's be fair, in most cases, when they fail, there's nothing to buy. There's no value in this company at all that you can recoup your investment. You're literally throwing that money away. And if you want to throw money away, send it my way because you know what? I can spend money with the best of them. And I'll even order NVIDIA hardware if that's what it takes.
Well, and there you go, Tom. There is something to buy for some of these companies, the Nvidia hardware. I mean, this stuff is like gold. Unfortunately, it's only like gold for a short time, and it could be that companies that have invested over the last couple of years in Nvidia hardware may find themselves sitting on, well, let's say not so much gold as they think once the new hardware comes out. We're already seeing that orders for H100 are slowing as the H200 launch nears commercial capacity. And we're going to start seeing companies investing in a new direction there. Same thing with a lot of this stuff. I mean, outdated hardware. Heck, the U.S. government is selling one of their supercomputers, and right now the auction is up to $27,000. Not a joke for a supercomputer. Because it's a 7-year-old supercomputer, and who wants that? It's going to cost a lot to move it. Frankly, I think we could see this with some of these AI startups in a few more years, where their once incredible investments in AI hardware become kind of a boat anchor because they're hopelessly out of date. But moving back to my optimistic and sunny worldview, I do think that there is an opportunity here. If I was advising investors, which I absolutely am not, I am in no way qualified to advise you on how to spend your money. But if I was one of them investors, I'd be looking at a product that did a thing. I know, radical idea, right? I would be looking at a startup that has a product that has a valuable function, a market that has customers with money to spend, and that actually produces tangible results. That would be incredible. And there are, I mean, despite the naysayers, Tom, there are some companies that are doing some pretty cool things. So, for example, again, mentioned in the Wall Street Journal article is Cognition AI. This is a really interesting startup. They're doing some really cool stuff about generative coding, basically helping software developers develop more, better, faster. They've gotten a really nice amount of funding, but they're actually producing a product that saves customers money, and customers are actually buying it. That's an example, I think, of a successful product. On the flip side, a lot of the self-driving car startups burn through all their cash and have kind of not a lot to show for it because, frankly, there just wasn't much of a market for that product among people who would pay for that product, as, for example, Tesla is seeing on a daily basis with their insanely expensive and strangely named full autonomous driving. The point being that there really are useful applications, there really are useful products. I think people just need to start looking for that. And again, another piece of advice, unsolicited and certainly not qualified, would be to take a look at companies that are not just building more freaking chatbots. Take a look at companies that are using AI to do other interesting things because all of the techniques and the tools and the processes that let you build an LLM can be used to build other types of artificial intelligence that can actually solve useful products or useful problems. And that's, I think that's where the market should go.
We may not be financial advisors, so you definitely shouldn't listen to our advice there. But what you should listen to our advice about is the events that we have upcoming at Tech Field Day, because that is something we are definitely qualified to speak on.
That was a
I'm
killer
qualified to tell
transition,
you that
Tom. Nice job.
I am qualified to tell you that Mobility Field Day 11 is coming up May 15th and 16th, and I'm very excited about the lineup of great presenters that we have coming your way during that event. So head over to techfieldday.com. Make sure that you set your calendar so that you don't miss a minute of that exciting event. We're going to be talking about all things related to stuff that doesn't have wires. And then if you're a software person, you're going to want to check out what's coming up right after that.
Yep, we've got App Dev Field Day coming up. We're working on some more names for that, launching that pretty soon. That's going to be the end of May, the 29th and 30th. We're also headed to Orlando for Click Connect. We are going to be releasing a podcast where we talk a little bit about what we're going to be covering there with the data people. So that podcast comes out on Tuesday. Click Connect is June 3rd through 5th, which overlaps with your event, Tom.
Yes, because I'm going to be back in sunny Las Vegas for Cisco Live US. I just realized it is my 18th Cisco Live in a row. And luckily, for the last 11 years, I've been able to do it as a part of Tech Field Day. And we are going to have some wonderful presentations from Cisco, some of their big announcements, as well as Open Gear and some more companies to come very soon. So make sure you're checking out techfieldday.com to learn more about that. And then the next week, Stephen, there's two exciting events.
That's right. There's the annual 6.5 Summit. Check out the65summit.com to learn more about that. That is a big, big event, probably the biggest event of the season for those of you who follow Pat Moorhead and Daniel Newman and the 6.5. That same week, we've got Cloud Field Day. We're going to be having a great group of delegates talking about modern infrastructure. And of course, we're going to connect in with the 6.5 Summit there as well. And Tom, you're heading out to HPE Discover.
I am. I just booked my hotel room yesterday, so I'm going to be out there for HPE Discover. We're actually working with our friends over at HPE Aruba Networking to learn about some of the neat advances that they've been making. You'll remember we were there last year. In fact, I believe somebody jumped over me on stage. But in the meantime, they've been making a lot of moves. They've been making some acquisitions and things like that. I also heard that we're going to be getting the keynote for HPE Discover in the Sphere. And I've been told that it's going to be completely covered with Wi-Fi access points. So stay tuned to learn more about how big of an undertaking that is. But as you're staying tuned, remember that the undertaking that we do here every week on the Gestalt IT Rundown is a labor of love for everyone out there because we appreciate you tuning in, whether you're watching us when we go live on our YouTube channel, whether you're checking out gestaltit.com for the show notes and all the linked articles where we pulled some of our information and provided some of our snarky analysis, or if you're listening to us in the podcast catcher of your choice. Maybe you're doing it before you go to sleep. You just want to get a little bit of news, and the dulcet tones of our voice just put you right out. But whatever it is, we hope that you'll tune in next week where we'll have more great news, some acquisitions, some security breaches, maybe a new Linux distribution released. I don't know. We'll have to see what happens. But until then, for myself, Tom Hollingsworth, for Mr. Stephen Foskett, and all the wonderful people who work here at Gestalt IT, thank you very much for tuning in for the rundown. Happy May Day, happy International Interpreter Day, and we hope that we'll see you very soon.
Noble Numbat.